This program is produced by the volunteers of Tellico Village Broadcasting.
Welcome to Handmade, a series about artisans and craftsmen who use their creativity and skills to make one-of-a-kind art pieces. In our modern society, when everything is mass-produced, pre-packaged, and available on Amazon, it's easy to forget that some things are still made by hand. In this series, we'll be visiting the studios and workshops of woodworkers, weavers, stained glass makers, metalworkers, quilters, and many more. Not only will you see these artisans at work, but you'll hear about their creative process and learn how they acquired the skills needed to make their unique pieces of art. So come on, let's visit the studio and workshop of today's featured artist. In today's episode, we're visiting the workshop of a master woodcarver, and he's going to show us how he turns this into this. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Greg, how you doing?
Nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting us in.
Oh, you're welcome.
Before we get into the carving process, tell us a little bit about how you got started in carving.
I was making some fishing lures on a belt sander, and my wife got tired of me sitting around in the garage. And she gave me this article of a group of guys that carve up at the high school. Went up there, went to the class, and everyone was very welcoming and gave me a knife, sharpened it up for me, gave me a block of wood, and I had some difficulty not cutting myself. And I had a lot of bandages, and this gentleman there that was a master carver brought in his life-size eagle that he is just finishing up. And that kind of got me interested in that maybe I could do something like this. This is my first piece.
Tell us a little bit about that.
This was a block of wood that they told me to cut everything away that didn't look like a swan. And it took me a long time to get to this part. I don't remember how long it was, but sanded it down and put some finish on it and kind of kept it with me just to remind me. This is it.
And the rest is history.
The rest is history, yeah.
Now, do you continue to take classes?
Different disciplines of the carving kind of had different techniques, and whether you're going to do relief carving or carving in the round, doing wildlife or doing faces.
And you said you took some from sculptor.
Wood carvers that did faces and taught classes really didn't teach the structure of the face.
Because faces are one of the hardest things to carve.
And sculptors actually did. They actually started off with the bone structure and showed how the high cheeks were formed and the actual measurements across the face, the length of the face, and where the nose is supposed to be.
At some point in your career, you entered competitions.
As soon as I learned how to carve birds and started going to carving shows, it's kind of a test to see just how good you are. So I started carving birds for competitive purposes. And it's a little bit different because of the exact measurements that some of the judges require.
Tell us a little bit about these pieces here.
Okay, these are relief carvings that were done out of cottonwood bark. This turned out to be an addiction for a while, and it was just so much fun to carve.
Tell us a little bit about this piece. This is really special. I'd like to know where the inspiration for this came from and a little bit about how it was made.
This was actually from a class that I took with relief carving. And this gentleman that taught this class was a Character Carver of America member, which only had 22 members in the United States.
Wow.
And his specialty was doing relief carving in a piece of wood that was 1 to 3/4 inches thick. And then to get the roundness and the depth in the faces to make it look like, if you're standing looking directly on, that it was carved in the round.
Tell us a little bit about the different kinds of woods and where you get them.
In this stack here, we've got some pecan, we've got some red oak, white oak, poplar, walnut, cherry, and some sycamore.
What makes one type of wood harder to carve than the other? It has something to do with the grain?
Now, it does have a lot to do with the grain, where an oak kind of has a spread grain. Walnut is nice and tight. So you've got the effect of the grain, but you also have the hardness of the wood.
Now that you've selected your wood, tell us a little bit about the process.
You can either get a pattern, lay the pattern on it on the side and on the top, and you take pieces of masking tape and wrap it around it, and you cut both sides out on the bandsaw. You'll cut the face side out, and then you turn it over and you'll cut the top side out. And what you usually end up with might be a shape like this. Other times I will take this block of wood, and if it's twisted or leaning differently, we will take a power bit. And this used to be a square block of wood, and we actually shape out by using these auger bits. And then later we'll start detailing out what you actually want the piece to look like. My favorite tools are the gouges and the chisels. These come in different lengths that you use for different size projects. And then you have the palm size ones that actually sit in your palm and you can carve with. The larger tools are sometimes used with mallets when you're originally roughing out. The blades are all shaped differently. This happens to be a V cutting tool to cut sharp angles into the wood, and they come in different degrees. Gouges, which are rounded, and you get all sorts of different shapes and widths used depending on which part of the bird you're working on. You'll have knives of this size that you use to hog out big chips of wood, and then you'll have the detail knife where you're cutting out the corner of an eye. Alright, what I have here is a black cap chickadee, and it has been roughed out on the bandsaw, and I'm beginning to define some of the feather groups, where you have the different feather groups through the breast. I will usually take a round gouge, which you can see we've already been cut. Now I'm going to start coming back in and cutting back into it with one of my V tools. This is a rounded V tool that is going to start shaping out some of these feathers. We will come back in with one of the flatter gouges and start dropping off some of the tops of the feathers. Start rounding these off. We'll start shaping down some of these feathers to start getting a little bit more contour and make them look like feather groups instead of clumps of wood.
So now the next step after the carving is you can even add more detail to some of your pieces.
This is a micro carver that is used to kind of start shaping the feather a little bit more. This is a cylinder bit that I'm going to use the edge to make some marks in it. And speed is very important with this. That's why we use these micro carvers. Kind of sounds like a dental tool. So we're going to turn up the speed a little bit. And you're going to just start hitting. Now it doesn't give you real fine detail yet. We will go and start wood burning later on, but what this does is it starts shaping down some of these other cuts, and they all go in different directions. Just like with carving and with the power bits there are all sorts of different tips that you use for wood burning. And again, the different temperatures will show how much you burn, but this will go out and give more detail to the power carving that I just did.
So this is where you study photographs.
And then once you get to the painting phase, you got to remember that, and you shade the paint just a little bit darker to create the shadowing effect.
Then you move on to the painting stage, correct?
Many of the competitive bird carvers will find that it takes them longer to paint the piece than it did to carve it.
Wow.
They're watering down the acrylic paints to a very thin coat. A degree of lightening for about 5 to maybe 8 coats.
I can see why painting takes often longer than carving. Where do you get your inspiration or ideas for projects?
I used to buy books, Birds of Prey, and I would go through those books and they would have very good pictures of these birds, and they would be in different situations.
This is such a unique piece. Tell us a little bit about how it started and the inspiration behind it.
This was a crotch of a tree where the main part of the tree was growing up through here, and then there was 2 cut off branches coming out of this part of the tree.
So sometimes the wood itself, the structure of it, sort of dictates a little bit about how it's going to end?
It does, and you know, there's some cracks in the wood as when they cut the tree down, if the weight hangs on it, it'll split some of the wood. And
these leaves, this detail here at the bottom with these leaves is just really very intricate as far as the veins and just the fact that they're stand out a little bit from the trunk of the tree.
that was kind of a way to finish off the bottom of the tree.
I think this is one of your most outstanding pieces, Tom. Tell us a little bit about how you made it, because it's a lot different than some of the other things that you've carved.
This started out as an idea that I got from a tinsmith at a show, and I thought I could do this out of wood. 17 different species of wood in the leaves. Then attached to the walnut tree using copper wire.
One of your specialties is walking canes. So tell us a little bit about this walking cane.
This one here. This is a heart of walnut, a 1x1 piece of walnut that I laminated some pine over the top. I thought that maybe cut through the pine to expose the walnut.
Okay.
And the pattern is called lacework pattern.
Now what about the head?
The head is a piece of butternut. Really nice piece of wood to carve. It holds its detail very nice, and it takes stains and finishes really good.
Pretty amazing. Especially all these little details here in his beard.
Yeah, that's a special tool that you use to carve with, a V tool. And then you can kind of create more definition by cutting deeper down in it with a knife. And it came out pretty good.
Beyond pretty good. I think it's excellent. It's obvious that you spent a lot of time carving. What do you like about it so much?
I can kind of see a progression of getting something done and a sense of accomplishment that, you know, there's steps that you go through, and you take a piece of wood that had no shape at all and now it actually looks like something. Sometimes not real good, and that becomes kindling, but...
Do you consider yourself a craftsman or an artist?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Sometimes I feel like I'm an artist, but I guess deep in my heart I feel more like a craftsman, where you actually can take and develop something and working a lot more with the hands and trial and error, where, I don't know, an artist seems to get it right the first time.
Not always.
Not always.
Now that you've seen a master woodcarver at work, I hope you have a greater appreciation of the time and skill needed to make something by hand. Learning a craft is a journey. It takes passion, practice, and time. I hope you enjoyed our profile of our local artisan. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Handmade.